Hey guys, BionicleSaurus here, how y'all doing? And in this video we are going to be taking a look at the new for 2016 Safari Limited Iguanodon, yet another new release from Safari. Let's get started. So, right off the bat, I can already tell that this is a very nice looking model. First of all, it has a fairly complex paint scheme by Safari Limited standards. When you look at some other recent figures like, say, the Pseudoceratops, that is just kind of a monotone gray plastic with little simple blotches of yellow, and you know, something like the Tyrannus that's again basically just gray plastic, with some white painted on over the feathered areas. You know, even though the paint jobs are usually well applied for Safari Limited figures, I do notice the color schemes can be kind of simplistic, and so it's nice to see this many different shades and hues of brown and tan and white being very nicely blended together in very unique patterns. Of course, the brightest and most notable of all the colors is this purple, which it doesn't cover much of the body, and that's probably for the better. It might have been a bit overpowering if it was on more of the figure, but I really like what they've done with it. My only complaint is that it is a bit less bright than it looked in the stock photo. In the stock photo, and here, with my nice lighting and everything, you can see, okay, we have some nice purple, but when you're looking at it in the average lighting of a room indoors, you know, it's like kind of unnoticeable, especially the stripes that are on the brown rather than the white of the tail are, you know, they're very similar in brightness to the brown, and so they get kind of lost in it. So it would have been nice to see perhaps a brighter, just more vibrant shade of purple chosen. The pose is simple but quite fluid. His back legs are pretty much in line with each other, showing that he's not really walking. However, one hand is actually just a slight bit off the ground and definitely stepping forward away from the other limbs. It's a bit awkward from some angles, like this angle, which is the actual stock photo has him at this angle, and I initially kind of had a thought that the pose looked rather stiff and kind of simplistic, but when you look at him, you know, turning him around and actually looking at him as a whole, you can see that while the pose is, like I said, very simplistic, it is at the very least somewhat dynamic and certainly does come across as natural and believable. So, for appearance, I give this figure a B. The paint job is well executed, however the color choices, with the exception of the very minor inclusion of purple, could have been more interesting. And again, the pose, while dynamic and fluid, is somewhat boring as well. So, moving on ahead straight into detail. As you can see, we have gotten what we have come to expect from Safari Limited these days, and that is individual scales across the entire body. The only place where the skin texturing starts to become a little bit less clearly defined in the sculpt is around the cheeks and the face. As you can see, the cheeks themselves are pretty much completely smooth, and some of the scalation on the head is a little bit indefined. The eyes, as you can see, are a bright, very vibrant neon green, and the eye paint itself is well applied, especially considering how small this figure's eyes and head are. The beak is very well sculpted. I believe there are even some small ridges around it, or, you know, on the part that would actually be biting things, so that is a nice inclusion. And overall, there's not much else to say. The entire body has individually sculpted scales. All the hooves and claws are very well sculpted and very well defined. There's a small ridge of little kind of bumps or osteoderms on the back, well, all along the ridge of the back anyway. Overall, while there's nothing extraordinary to point out, the detail is nonetheless completely fantastic. The only reason I'm not, more excited about it is because this is truly what Safari Limited has been giving us for the past 4 or 5 years now, and it's quite impressive, I must say. So, for detail, I give this figure a straight A, with individually sculpted scales and a very well-applied paint job. Even in the small detailed areas, there is almost nothing you could possibly complain about with this figure when it comes to its detail. So, moving on to accuracy. overall, there is very little to complain about, but nonetheless, there are a few issues, so let's get those out of the way first. First off, the outer 4th and 5th fingers on the hands should not have hooves or claws on them. Secondly, and this is pretty much the only other issue I could find, is that the head does appear a fair bit shrink-wrapped, mainly on the cheek. You can see a clear indent of where the cheek is and see the lower jaw and the skull. It's a bit odd. It's been a while since we've seen any kind of shrink-wrapping of the fenestrae on heads from Safari Limited figures, and it's a bit disappointing to see such a kind of odd blunder for them to make. There's certain companies that still get that wrong a lot, like Collecta, but Safari generally is pretty good when it comes to over shrink wrapping things. They generally put a perfect amount of meat on the bones, but in this case, I must say, I really wish that the jawline wasn't so defined. I wish that the cheek just blended more with the rest of the head. Other than those two very small issues, though, I must say there is barely anything to complain about when it comes to this figure's scientific accuracy. The proportions perfectly reflect our current kind of views on iguanodontids and Iguanodon specifically. Other than that, I mean, there's barely anything to say. It's not like I'm going to be really commenting on anything specifically about how accurate it is, but nonetheless, there are really no other issues besides those two little nitpicks. So I think Safari, while they haven't fully perfected this, certainly did a very good job. Although, you know, many of the other Safari Limited figures we've been looking at have been close to perfect when it comes to accuracy, so it's a little disappointing to see even small issues, but overall, it is very hard to complain. So, for accuracy, I give this figure an A. So, my final overall rating for this figure is an A-. It seems at this point that it is fairly easy to predict that I will give a rating similar to that is a very high one, to just about every one of these new Safari Limited figures, but I must say they truly deserve it. Safari has been knocking these things out of the park so far. Thank you for watching, and BionicleSaurus signing out.